Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he will meet US President Donald Trump later this month to discuss Middle East peace. His office says the invitation came after a phone call with Trump, though the location of the meeting was not disclosed. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu says he will not step down in exchange for a pardon in his corruption trial, dismissing the idea when questioned by reporters. Netanyahu says voters and not legal bargains will decide his future as Israel focuses on historic cooperation with Germany. Japan says Chinese fighter jets locked their radar on Japanese military aircraft in 2 dangerous incidents near Okinawa, calling the action extremely regrettable. Tokyo has lodged a formal protest, while Beijing disputes the account as regional tensions rise over Taiwan and military drills. A drone attack by the Sudanese paramilitary forces hit a kindergarten in south-central Sudan, killing 50 people, including 33 children. The tragedy comes as the Rapid Support Forces continue their violent assault throughout the region, now concentrating in the oil-rich Kordofan states. Qatar's Prime Minister warns that the Gaza ceasefire is at a critical moment and could unravel without rapid movement towards a permanent solution. On the ground, reported Israeli air raids have hit Maghazi camps in central Gaza, with the IDF killing 7 residents in the north. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says that supporting Israel is a key part of Germany's policy shortly after arriving on a visit to Jerusalem. This comes after Germany resumed arms supplies to Israel after international condemnation. Hamas said it is ready to hand over its arms to a Palestinian Authority on the condition of the end of Israeli occupation. The group says that their weapons are linked to the existence of occupation and would accept the deployment of UN forces as a separation force. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says he fully supports the second strike on a suspected drug boat in the Caribbean and insists he would have made the same decision. Reports say an admiral ordered the follow-up strike to kill 2 survivors, while Hegseth declines to say whether the classified video will be released. We start this hour in Europe, and peace talks aimed at ending the Ukraine war appear close to a breakthrough, but sharp differences remain. US Special Envoy for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, says a deal is really close, while the Kremlin insists the United States must make radical changes to its peace proposals. Kellogg says that negotiations have reached the last 10 meters, which, according to him, is the most difficult phase of any peace effort. He identified 2 key issues that are still not settled. One is the future of Ukraine's Donbass. The other is control of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe, which remains under Russian occupation. He said resolving these points could unlock a broader settlement. However, Moscow pushed back. Kremlin officials say Washington's proposals require serious and radical revisions, particularly on territorial questions. On the other hand, Ukraine has rejected any handover of territory without a referendum. This comes as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that he had a long and substantive phone call with US President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner as diplomatic efforts intensify. Joining us now is Professor Veselin Popovsky. He's a professor and vice dean of the Jindal Global Law School, joining us live from New Delhi. Professor Popovsky, as always, it's a pleasure to talk to you on these issues. A huge statement today from the US envoy, Steve Witkoff, pointing out two issues. One being the control of the Zaporozhye nuclear plant, a huge power plant in Russian-occupied Ukraine. The other being the Donbass. These two seem like huge issues. Kellogg has described it as being 10 meters away from the finish line. Do you think that there is any hope here?
I don't think there is 10 meters from the finish line, and this is a controversial statement. On one hand, it's very close. On another hand, the two issues are very difficult, as Washington said, and what Moscow is saying, they need to have a radical changes, and they don't only limit to 2 points. Effectively nothing new. Both sides, US and Russia, are playing peacemaking, but they are not really serious here. First of all, Ukraine will not surrender. They consider to be the victim of this. This is not like a business deal to sell a land of one person to another person. This is a result of a 4 years brutal war with many civilian kills on the Ukrainian side, massive war crimes. So the treatment of Russia should be exactly like an aggressor and like war criminal, rather than just in an equal business transactional way as Americans try to achieve. And that's absolutely incompetent approach by Witkoff, who himself is a real estate agent like Donald Trump. So they have no other manner or method to solve all of this. But they are talking big talks about peacemaking, and that's not serious at all. And longer we see that going on, more agony is all of that. I have no other words to describe it. It's attempt to do something, but being incompetent to do that from the American administrations. Russians are playing games always. They love to talk about peace, and in the meantime to bomb cities and to cut the electricities, to kill civilians, and continue what they do.
And Professor Popovsky, of course, outgoing US envoy Kellogg, pointed out two sticking points, this Zaporozhye power plant and the Donbass region. How important are these two things to both sides?
Yes, the Zaporozhye nuclear plant is a significant factor. It supplies a lot of energy. It's a big one, and that's why both sides are very willing to have that in their hand. Obviously, everything belongs to Ukraine to start with. Obviously, Ukrainians need that nuclear plant exactly for all their electricity needs, for the reconstruction of Ukraine. But for that matter, for Russia, it's also a very big appetite to ask for the same. Because it's on the on the battlefield, neither side cannot utilize it, and that's why for Russia it's important to keep it in its hands. But obviously for Ukrainians, that's a no-go. They will not surrender it. Donbass, yes, 80% of the territory of Donbass is in Russian hands, but the remaining 20% is significant also. By the way, including because of some resources, because of some industries, Slavyansk and Kramatorsk are large industrial cities. And again, Russia is not making advances on the battlefield. After stealing 80% of Ukrainian Donbass, they now want the peace agreement to give them the other 20%. It's like a robber who comes to your house, steals 60-70% of your furniture, and then wants signing of possession of the other 20-30% of your furniture. It's exactly like this. Absolutely no go. It's understandable. Why? Because Putin wants to report that he achieved the goals of the special military operation by capturing the 4 regions. Obviously, he cannot do that in a military way. He wants to do it in diplomatic way, but that doesn't going to work.
Yes, and Professor Popovsky, just finally, very quickly, the Donbass region, part of and Luhansk, is predominantly Russian-speaking, of course. However, pre-2014 polls show that most identified as Ukrainian. Ukraine has rejected any handover of territory without a referendum. How likely do you think how do you think this referendum would go, and how likely do you think Russia would agree to such a thing?
Again, first of all, about Russian speaking, that's absolutely ridiculous. Austria is a German-speaking country entirely, 100%, and there is no point for Germany to claim any territory of Austria. By the way, half of the Ukrainian army defending its territory speaks Russian. All these brave souls, half of those brave soldiers, courageous ones that die defending Ukraine, speak Russians. So the language is absolutely no issue here. Obviously, these are Ukrainian territory, and by the way, not from 1954, when Crimea only became Ukrainians, but from the very beginning. This has always been Ukrainian territory from the beginning of the Soviet Union in 1918, when, yes, Ukrainian Soviet Republic was established after the Socialist Revolution. So there is no point to argue about Donbass and Luhansk. Even if they 100% speak Russian, doesn't make any difference. These are Ukrainian territory. And referendums will show what people want. They already suffer so much from the Russian occupation. So let's have fair and free referendums in Donbass and Luhansk and see what people say. By the way, even before the war, there was a referendum, and I think 65% of people in Donbass and Luhansk were saying that they feel Ukrainians. But even in Crimea, it was also about 50-50. So the only territory that Russia may have some desire to hold is Crimea, where the population is mixed in their attitude, in their identity, whether they're Russians or Ukrainian. The rest of Ukraine is in big majority Ukrainian.
Yes, Professor Vasily Popovsky, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to talk to you on these matters. We now move on. And Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rakyabov says that Russia stands shoulder to shoulder with the Venezuelan leadership and calls on the administration of US President Donald Trump to avoid escalating the situation with Caracas into a full-scale conflict. The senior diplomat noted that Moscow views the situation around Venezuela with great alarm and concern, as tensions are not easing and escalation continues. He also emphasized that Russia hopes that the Trump administration will refrain from further escalating the situation towards a full-scale conflict. This comes as Washington has conducted more than 20 strikes on boats, resulting in over 80 deaths. Although the Trump administration justifies these as self-defense measures under the legal authority to target designated terrorist organizations transporting drugs into the United States. Joining us now is Mark Sutherland. He is a geopolitical commentator and he joins us live from London. Mark, it's a pleasure to have you here on the programme. What are your thoughts about this announcement from Moscow asking the United States to de-escalate its activity in the Caribbean and a bit more about that relationship as well?
I just wonder whether we're going to have to look at the Cuban Missile Crisis history all over again, Thomas. The issue is to the American administration, and many people have looked at this for many years, particularly a book written in 1992, Narco-Terrorism, by Rachel Ehrenfeld. That's how far, and many years before that, have these issues been of grave concern. And of course, when you have then, as number one issue in your administration, said, right, we need to secure our border. We are not, the fact that under the Biden administration, you and I have discussed this, with millions and millions of illegal people have then come over to the border with an open, wide border policy that Biden had. What that has brought in is deep concerns about who has actually come into the country. As there is this game going on, this extremely serious game, where people are, like Russia, want a multipolar world. They want influence. China want to be the #1 hegemony in the whole world. So if you've then got an opposition to that, which is America, how can you then undermine that? And just quickly, drugs are a profoundly serious problem, and they are taking the means to deal with that. Whether you agree or not, I understand, but other people may not. That I understand that when they turn around and say, what proof have they got? Well, the other issue is when you go up to Canada and you look at Vancouver and you look at the open policy on drugs in whatever way you can take whatever you want on the streets and the effects on the humanity, all you can do is basically be extremely sad and upset by what you then see. There has been many issues of young people being affected by drugs, fentanyl, etc., that is coming over the border, and the administration is saying no. There is also geopolitics that is going on because Maduro, socialism, and that is then playing out here, which again we need far more time to discuss. Thank you, Thomas.
Yes, just Mark, very quickly as well. Of course, we have had the USS Gerald Ford posted up in the Caribbean, the biggest aircraft carrier in the world. We've also seen these extremely controversial strikes on these drug boats that have left over 80 people dead. From your view, how close are we to that threshold of what Russia has called a possible full-scale conflict here?
Well, it's the last thing that we want. Well, we want, but also understandably, America is flexing its muscles. If they do that, then it's understandable that the Russian propaganda machine then comes in full bore because of their relationships, because of the relationships that they have in that area. And the other thing is, to some people's ears, that may be uncomfortable to say, hence my referencing that book, is then in recent times, when you look at then Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations and how they then raise money, and hence the word narco-terrorism, hence the word that is how they then raise money, and so do other organizations in that theater, in that arena, in that part of the world. And this is what it maybe is not talked about, vocalized in a big way. But this also comes into the mix. If you feel that your country, what you stand for, is being threatened by the huge amounts of drugs coming through, then that needs to be addressed. Now, before someone then throws the name Oliver North at me and Iran-Contra, I hear you loudly, because sometimes it can work both ways. That's not a popular thing then to say. But now the administration under the President Trump is wishing to deal with this. And I understand it when people say we don't like the way this is being done because we then need proof. Just quickly, when these boats are going out, is looking at who they are linked to, how they are armed, and it is then an army that then takes this seriously. Same with Mexican cartels. You're not just dealing with mafia; you are dealing with full-blown militias, army, and how they are then armed to the teeth. So it's one army fighting another. This is what's not discussed, but these are all these issues that need to be discussed in regard to this subject, in my humble opinion. Thank you, Thomas.
Yes, thank you, Mark, for joining us as always. Pleasure to have you on the programme. We now move on and over to the Middle East, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz have held significant bilateral talks in Jerusalem today. After their meeting concluded, they also addressed a joint press conference, which just concluded a short while ago. Now, in the presser, the Israeli Prime Minister said that he had, quote, honest and open conversation with the German Chancellor, despite having slight disagreements. Netanyahu also mentioned that the talks focused on deepening their defence cooperation and collaborating on technological matters. Speaking on the first phase of the Gaza Peace Plan, he said that it is nearing closure, with only one more hostage body yet remaining to be returned. Let's in fact listen in to what the Israeli Prime Minister had to say today.
Phase one, we're almost there. We have one more hostage deceased, Hani Gvili, a hero of Israel. to return here. And then we very shortly expect to move into the second phase, which is more difficult, or equally difficult.
Additionally, Netanyahu hinted at a second and third phase, which would involve disarming Hamas and demilitarizing the entire Gaza region. It is important to note that this is the German Chancellor's first visit to Israel after being elected to office in May earlier this year. Merz had also met with Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Saar and President Isaac Herzog yesterday night. Earlier in the day, Merz visited the Yad Vashem Memorial, where he attended a ceremony and paid warm tributes to the Jewish victims who lost their lives in the Holocaust. Moreover, Merz also remarked on the bilateral ties between the two countries, reaffirming positively on the existence and security of Israel. Let's take a listen in.
Ist mit Händen zu greifen, welche bleibende historische Verantwortung Deutschland trägt. Deutschland muss für die Existenz und die Sicherheit Israels einstehen. Das gehört zum unveränderlichen Wesenskern unserer Beziehungen, und zwar für immer.
Okay, of course, today's huge bilateral meeting, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the first visit to Israel by Germany's newly elected Chancellor, who held significant bilateral talks today, with a press conference focused on the Israeli peace plan in Gaza and regional deterrence. Merz, of course, reaffirmed Berlin's unwavering security commitment to Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu, he, of course, aligned and defended Israel's campaign in the Gaza Strip. However, one difference severely remained: the idea of a two-state solution, both of which sides vocally said that they disagreed on. Joining us now is Matti Zweig. He is a geopolitical expert and he joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Matti, for joining us here on NewsX World. I want to repeat that point that I just said. Of course, both sides spoke glowingly of one another, however, reaffirmed that they do disagree on one thing, and that is the establishment of a Palestinian state as the end goal. Now, of course, Germany did not recognize Palestine this year like certain European counterparts. However, it did say that it intends to do so in the future when stability emerges. Can I get your thoughts on that?
Well, always when we talk, everything depends of the complexities of the same moment, because the basic things don't change. I mean, Europe is continuing to talk about the solution of two states when nothing is stabilized inside what is so-called Palestine, which is the Judea, Samaria, and Gaza Strip, and which is supposed to be the future Palestinian state with maybe East Jerusalem as the capital. But these things are not what is going on the ground. I mean, things have changed since the end of the 90s and starting with the 2000s, and things were worse every year and year. And now we are in a position that the Oslo Accords, they continue, but the Oslo Accords, they cannot be a base now for a future peace, because we had all these developments also in Judea and Samaria, and also in area A, B, and C, and also in the Gaza Strip, especially in the Gaza Strip. So until it's not stabilized a government in the Gaza Strip, until it's not deep changes, as they say themselves, all the powers about the Palestinian Authority, nothing can be implemented as a future Palestinian state for now. What this can be, it's intermediate agreements and security agreements. That's what they are trying to do first in Gaza Strip, because it has been all this plan the first phase is going to finish with the last person deceased that hopefully will go back to Israel. And then they can implement the second phase. The second phase includes dismantling the military part of the Hamas, and nobody is taking responsibility of that. I talked this yesterday with your colleague. I mean, people are showing their real faces. I mean, they are talking like there is a second phase, but without second phase. So if someone is going to take responsibility for the second phase and they are going to dismantle Hamas, everything is going to be smoothly in the same way that Israel cooperates with the Palestinian Authority in security in Judea and Samaria. They can cooperate also in the Gaza Strip. So you have, you need to implement the second phase, and everything will go further. About Netanyahu, of course, he said everything that he thinks to Merz. He has his certain coalition, which is very hard line. And of course that the Germans agree that Israel needs security, but they need a different approach to the future. Israel has the government that has in this moment before elections. So that's what it is. They have to have all these accords taking care of what is really on the ground. And the reality is to implement the second phase in Gaza Strip and to continue the security means in Judea and Samaria until further developments.
Matti, just briefly, because we're running out of time, how important is these next few months and of course how these negotiations move forward for the state of Israel and its relationship with its Western partners?
Well, they have been deteriorated because all this operation, these 2 years that Israel sees as a counteroffensive and the world sees like a disproportionate offensive. But anyway, it's what it is. It is the reality. Israel is trying to destroy completely Hamas. Now they have almost stopped, except for some incidents, even deadly incidents, but only incidents, not full war. And if the big powers, they are really with Trump and with Turkey and Egypt and everybody, they are going to understand the Israeli side. Everything is going to be in progress. And, you know, we always go back to the same. Until Hamas is not dismantled, things are not going to be better in the future. If they're really going to dismantle Hamas, everything will be just fine.
Yes, Matti Zaweg, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you and speak to you here on the programme as always. We now move on to our next story, and Germany's Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul is heading to China for his first visit, aiming to tackle a range of critical trade issues. Wadephul says he will address concerns over rare earths, semiconductors, steel and electric vehicles, areas where German companies face supply risks and market pressures. He will also urge China to use its influence over Russia to support peace efforts in Ukraine. The visit had been postponed from October after Beijing initially confirmed only one of the meetings requested. Wadephul says direct dialogue with China is essential amid growing geopolitical tensions and global economic challenges. Okay, we move on, and Benin's interior minister has said that the country's armed forces have recently foiled a coup attempt which was carried out by a small group of soldiers reportedly led by Colonel Tigri Pascal. Now, according to the interior minister, at least 8 soldiers earlier hijacked state television and allegedly announced that their military committee had taken over Benin and that they suspended the constitution and dissolved all the national institutions. Let's in fact listen in to what the interior minister said on the matter.
Au petit matin de ce dimanche 7 décembre 2025, un groupuscule de soldats a engagé une mutinerie dans le but de déstabiliser l'État et ses institutions. Face à cette situation, les forces armées béninoises et leur hiérarchie fidèles à leur serment, sont restées républicaines. Leur riposte a permis de garder le contrôle de la situation et de faire échec à la manœuvre. Aussi, le gouvernement invite-t-il les populations à vaquer normalement à leurs occupations. Je vous remercie.
Well, that's all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more international updates.